you guys so much for coming out. This is fantastic. I want to wave to people back there. So I'm going to just read a short bit from,
Microphone towards your face.
Thank you. My husband, Clive.
And tilt towards your mouth.
Okay. Oh, my God. Technical help. Thank you guys for turning out, especially on the night of the debates. I felt like it was this weird thing to compete with. I was like, it's me versus the entire Democratic lineup. So I'm gonna read a little bit of the first chapter, and then I'm gonna talk with Willa, and then we'll have a conversation. So, this is from the opening chapter that's called "The Big Picture: How Buffy the Vampire Slayer Turned Me into a TV Critic." When I first began watching television, there didn't seem to be much to argue about. Like many children of the 70s, I grew up sitting cross-legged in front of a big console in the living room, singing along to the Electric Company while my mom made Kraft macaroni and cheese. I dug Taxi, I loved MASH. In my teens, I memorized Monty Python sketches with my friend Maria Salazar. But I also regarded TV the way that Americans had been taught to since the 1950s. Television was junk. It wasn't worthy of deep thought, the way that books or movies might be. It was something that you enjoyed, then forgot about. It wasn't until my 30s that I had what amounted to a soul-shaking conversion on the night that I watched Sunnydale High School principal Bob Flutie die, torn to bits by hyenas. At the time, in the spring of 1997, I was a literature doctoral student at NYU, foggily planning on becoming a professor, maybe a Victorianist, but anyway, somebody who read for a living. Every morning, I woke up, flopped onto the sofa, and opened up yet another 900-pager. Across the room from me was an old-fashioned console TV, a dinosaur even for the era, with a broken remote control. So in order to watch my first episode of Buffy, I had to physically walk across the room, then click the large circular dial over to channel 11, to the WB, a brand new netlet, and then I had to walk all the way back to the sofa. Walking across the room to change the channel was still a perfectly normal thing to do in 1997. It had been nearly 60 years since the first television, spookily nicknamed the Phantom Teleceiver, had launched at the 1939 World's Fair. And yet the medium was, with a few advances, like the addition of color and the still tentative expansion of cable, not that different from what it had been in the 1950s, when families gathered to watch Milton Berle. Shows aired once a week. They were broken up by ads. When the ads were on, you peed. When they ended, someone in the other room would yell, "You're missing it!" and you'd run back in. If you loved a particular show, you had to consult the elaborate grids in the print newspaper or in TV Guide to know when to watch. Alf, closed captions, comedy. Alf is upstaged by a lovable dog that followed Brian home, so he gives the pooch away to a crotchety woman, Ann Ramsey. By the way, to write this sentence, I consulted many old TV guides and just somehow ended up choosing Alf, but I literally had a page in my file where it had like many different short descriptions of TV shows. The main thing, though, was that television went away. It was a disposable product like a Dixie cup. Although scripted television hadn't aired live for many decades, it still felt live. You could watch rental movies on your VCR, and for a few years they were available everywhere. But most people I was friendly with didn't regularly pre-program theirs to record much TV because doing so was such a pain in the ass. You had to spin 3 plastic dials for the day, the hour, and the minute. This glitchy, even if you were an early internet adopter, which I was, dialing in was a grindingly slow, unreliable process. And when you did connect with the hostile shriek of static that we optimistically called a handshake, no videos showed up, just a wall of blinking neon fonts. Nothing ever arrived on demand. This glitchy ephemeral quality and the ads that broke up the episodes were a major part of TV's crappy reputation. This part may be hard to remember even if you lived through it, but just before the turn of the century, nearly universally by default and with an intensity that's tough to summon up now, television was viewed as a shameful activity, as chewing gum for the eyes, to quote drama critic John Mason Brown. This was true not only of snobs who boasted they didn't even own a TV. It was true of people who liked TV. It was true of people who made it too. TV was entertainment, not art. It was furniture, quite literally, it sat in your living room, that helped you kill time. It was how to numb lonely hours while eating a TV dinner, which was cultural shorthand for a pathetic existence. TV might be a gold mine, economically speaking, but that only made it more corrupt. If you were an artist, writing TV was selling out. If you were an intellectual, watching it was a sordid pleasure, like chain smoking. People still referred to television, with no irony, as the boob tube and the idiot box. Some people still do. This was the value system that I was soaking in Palmolive style on the night that I watched my first episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Even more than most TV of that era, the show sounded like a throwaway. It had that silly title. It was based on a campy movie. It starred a soap opera actress and an actor from a Taster's Choice ad. And if you tried to describe the plot, it screamed guilty pleasure. It was a horror comedy about a superpowered cheerleader leading a double life. By day, Buffy Summers flirted with boys and flunked her classes. By night, she was the chosen one, stabbing vampires in the heart with pointy wooden stakes. The credits opened with a wolf howling, wild riffs of hard rock guitar, and shots of Buffy herself doing kung fu. It looked like a good way to kill time before getting back to analyzing themes of the public woman in George Eliot's Daniel Deronda. Instead, I fell into a trance of joy. I'd never finish my doctorate. Thanks. So, let's go ahead.
Can I see it? 'Cause I have that one.
Yeah. Here you go. Yeah, as Willa knows, I actually cut, when I was reading, there's a slightly different first line that opens the chapter, because in my neurotic revising of the book, I felt like it would frame the piece better, so I think that's how we're going to start, right?
Yeah, I'm going to start with the line that she just didn't read, which is that. Just because I had a question about it. It's so nice to see all of you. I just want to say, like, I'm also a TV critic, but I am a huge fan of Emily's.
Yeah, we
so
work together.
I'm excited for this.
She is
I have lots
wonderful.
of questions.
Yeah, I feel like we'll debate things, but then we were like,
We always agree.
on a lot
Yeah.
of stuff.
So the first line of this book is, what happens when your side wins the fight, the drunken cultural brawl that you've been caught up in for nearly 2 decades? So, what do you mean that we won the fight? And does that mean you feel like we still have fighting to do? Or like, what is it? How does it change how you do your job?
Well, it was weird when I was putting together the book, which is both a collection of my writing and has new writing, but traces essentially these 2 decades of TV. And then one of the things that I had to feel when I was putting them together was how much television itself, the whole definition of television has changed, and then in very obvious ways, how much it's moved to the center of the culture. And I had questions about whether I start with this sort of Buffy and the Sopranos argument in my head, not Buffy versus the Sopranos, I love both shows, but this question about how they were culturally received. Part of me was like, people don't talk about TV the same way that they did in 1997. People don't have some of the same anxieties about whether television can be taken seriously. But I have to say, publicizing the book, I'm not sure. Like, do you think that...
Publicizing the book, people have turned out to still be really snobby about TV?
No, not that at all. It's not even about snobbery. It's about, like, the main theme of the book is not even about, like, one art form versus another. It's about celebrating television as television instead of constantly comparing it out of anxiety, cultural anxiety that goes back decades, to say, if a show is good, say, it's so good it's like a book, it's so good it's like a movie.
The Wires, Dickens, etc.
Right. And so the whole book is about defining TV and taking TV on its own terms and expanding the kinds of TV that get talked about in a serious way. So that part of it, I do feel like... I don't have quite so much of a chip on my shoulder. I feel like the book traces the a little bit of the way that the conversation has changed. And frankly, it's a much more fruitful debate when you don't have to start from square one and just say, as I was honestly in the late 90s, just drunkenly at cocktail parties going, no, it's really good. He was sort of annoyed.
One of the things that comes up with Buffy, like in particular, is like that it looks bad.
Yeah.
And I don't care at all like how a TV show looks. Like
This is one of the things we don't argue about. Because we
I don't
actually
give a
share
shit.
this TV-centric...
But can you like talk to me? Like, what's the worst looking show you love?
That's an interesting question. I'm like, what is the worst looking show that I love? Like there's a lot of shows that are sort of a basic cable, teen soaps that don't have a very distinctive visual look. And, neither you nor I came from film studies. So one of the things that I think was both in some ways an advantage and in some ways a disadvantage in my writing about TV is I just had no, auteurist, visual-centric model of creation in my head. Like, I was interested in Buffy. I wasn't interested in analyzing every frame of Buffy to figure out whether it had a good mise-en-scène. Like, that's just not my way of looking at things. But I will say that it's been a real challenge for me as a critic, I think in a healthy way, because the last 10 years especially have marked this incredible influx of directors into TV. And one of my formative ideas about TV, which is, for economic and practical reasons, TV is a writer's medium. And, as movies are a visual medium where the writer is secondary and the director is often primary, just in power and money and control. On TV, it's the opposite. It's really a writer's medium and the writer's room is like the primal scene of TV. But, technology and the way TV is made has changed. So, there are a lot of shows that are really visually distinctive, and that has to be part of the conversation. But like you, I don't necessarily think if a show is visually gorgeous or really thoughtful in its visuals, that it's automatically better or more, esteemed elite. And in fact, a lot of great-looking shows are empty.
Well, so this is my, half-baked, I keep pretending I'm going to write about it, but
This is my theory, which is mine.
But no, it's it's very gendered. It's like men care what TV looks like because they're looksist. Do you know what I mean? I'm just in it for the story.
I don't think anyone who reads my book doesn't think I have gendered ideas about TV to some extent, but
that one strikes as being bullshit.
But I think that we're both TV critics, and I do think that it's really striking when I hang out with movie critics, many of whom are friends of mine, but it's a more masculinist world, like in tone and emphasis, in the amount of women that are movie critics. I think I find that's not true in TV criticism. It just, one of the things is, this is connected, but as you'll see in just a second, but I have this pan that I wrote of True Detective, which is definitely connected to this discussion about visual swashbuckle and whether it means something about whether the show has anything to say. But sometimes when I've talked about that review, which is a feminist review, in many ways, people have been like, oh, it's you versus a bunch of guys who love True Detective. But that's not true at all, as you and I know, because it was me, you, and Molly Lambert.
And I loved True
and
Detective.
she loved True Detective. And it was not, but you were in the middle. It was basically Molly Lambert loved the show. She's a wonderful critic. And we were all on Twitter arguing about it. And I was like, no, this is the utopia. It's three female critics who have very different takes on this show discussing it. And it's not this boring, boys versus girls thing. I'm not saying there aren't gendered qualities to aesthetics, but I don't think it's as simple as,
yeah. What is the most controversial opinion you had that turned out to not be controversial at all?
Well, I'm trying to think what was I'm not sure whether the ideas were controversial. I do think that there are things that are somewhat more common, common things that people talk about. I'm trying to think of what was actually divisive. The truth is, when the True Detective piece came out, I was definitely saying something that people weren't saying. Honestly, it was the recent thing. It's not that people will agree with me on it, but I did write a Miss Maisel negative.
Well, I was thinking of Miss Maisel and also when you introed your Sex and the City piece that you were worried about it. That I feel like the Miss Maisel piece, even people who liked it were like, "This is so great."
Well, this is the thing. It's so fun. This is the one thing I will say is gendered. They say this in the book. It's I got incredibly hostile email and long handwritten letters from guys about, generally from guys, honestly, about the True Detective piece. I got sweet notes from people who are major Miss Maisel fans. Like, they loved the show, and they were like, I thought your piece was funny, it was thought-provoking, it gave me some stuff to chew on. And I don't know, I do think that there's something about the show, the viewership, the gender overlap, that definitely led to a more, I mean, it was funny to me. But in a way, that was a controversial thing to say, but it's a more fruitful conversation to have when everything is not just, when you're able to dissent from something and still take the art seriously. That's the goal.
You used to do this insane thing where you kept watching shows you panned.
Yeah, I know. We had this conversation
because she was like, I think you were just like worried they would get, like, you felt like it was only fair to the show that you continued to see it.
Yeah. This wasn't
in case it redeemed itself. But like, do you continue in this moment of too much television with this?
I can't even watch all the good shows that are out there, so I definitely can't keep doing that. But it was for a while a super masochistic ethic that I had, and it was only about shows that I panned. It wasn't about shows I wrote a mixed review of or found boring or something like that. So I did watch, but the thing is, honestly, it was kind of fruitful. Like, I wrote this negative review of Newsroom. I watched all of Newsroom. I got a lot out of Newsroom. I mean, I ended up writing, I think, a pretty good piece in the 3rd season of Newsroom about this insane episode. And in the review, I said, if you try to pan an Aaron Sorkin show, it turns you into an Aaron Sorkin character. You're like walking down the hall, like, But so that it actually ended up being helpful. But the problem, and I think that you understand this as well, is that when you review TV, you're both reviewing a part and a whole. So you're reviewing something halfway through. There is a part of me that's like, can they land this plane? Like, like who? So I can't do it every time, but I have it. And because shows do go back and forth, and there are shows that I've written things about early on that proved to be much better than I thought they were. So I think that there's some, like, just humility and understanding that your impression of the art may change or the art may change.
Like what's a good example of that?
Like I actually wrote a piece that, honestly, it's a funny piece. It's the beginning of Cougar Town was not good, like the first half of the first season. And so I used it as a peg, like a journalistic peg, to write about the sort of MILF cougar phenomenon on TV and the sort of mixture of empowerment and self-abnegation and misogyny and all that stuff. And it was a fun piece. I wrote about Samantha and all this stuff. But I did use Cougar Town a little bit as a punching bag because I thought that show had an oddly self-loathing vibe to its portrait. But the show turned into a good show. And I actually made a rule that I would never review a network-ish sitcom before the first 6 episodes. And I wrote this in a column that it was like reviewing a newborn because it couldn't lift its neck. Because I was like, the first 6 episodes, even of really great sitcoms, tend to be an experimental period. And I do think that as a critic, you have to respect the way the show was made, and that's just native to that.
Okay, this is like a kind of complicated question. I'm gonna do it short.
Is it 3 parts?
And maybe I hope it's not. I hope it's just 1 part. Maybe babbly more. So because you came into sort of like your obsession with TV through Buffy, which is actually a very good show. And so I would say I came into my like real passion for TV, a 90210, which I think is like a much more mixed
really interesting
show. I wonder a lot about this thing where, like, I think a thing that critics aren't good talking about is like the capacity to actually love something that is fully mediocre. Mm-hmm. Like, you don't hate it. You're not hate watching it. You really like
Smash.
It. Right, but like it's
no, I shouldn't have done that cop thing. And actually, Smash isn't mediocre.
It's like
Smash is really like good and bad in really
so this is the thing is
ambitious ways.
I actually am like, I think it might be actually, like, not everybody only likes good stuff, right? That's like the illusion we all have that we all always have good taste all the time. Obviously, it's a lie. You just look at anyone else you know, it's a lie. So, if you love this thing or you really enjoy it, but like it's like this where you have
to make a case for why it's good.
And I'm just asking you, like, do you think everything you like actually has something really good about it, or sometimes you just really like something and you're in this position where you're like, I mean, actually explaining why something might be interesting is almost easier than answering whether it's good or bad, but like that just by you enjoying it actually has something really good about it.
Maybe something being enjoyable is a form of goodness. It's
totally
just a different form of goodness.
But I guess I'm just like, can we keep in mind the essential mediocrity of the thing? and also still be like, fucking love it.
Yeah, I mean,
You should watch
I know what you're talking about. I mean, there's definitely stuff. I mean, it's this has come up a lot in talking about the book because I make a case in the book for the problem of the expression guilty pleasure, but sometimes I've been talking to people and they've been like, oh yeah, I really enjoy watching the show that is really garbage, but it's very pleasurable to me, and I feel like that's the case you're making. I'm like, no, that's not actually what I'm saying, because I think there's two kinds of guilty pleasures. There's actually the thing you're talking about where something is kind of only okay, but it satisfies an emotional need. It's not necessarily terrible, but it's like I mean, I can actually think of shows that I feel like fit the bill, but I hesitate to say them because I feel like they'll be somebody's favorite show. Like,
Well,
it's just
I'm
a weird, look, well, I haven't watched the later seasons of the show, but what is the show with, with Jane Fonda and
Frankie and
Frankie, like that was a show
Tracy
where I was
Frankie.
like, this is satisfying a real need, but I feel like as sitcom craftsmanship, it's full of like super hacky rhythms. It's not doing anything incredibly original. It has these cool themes about older women, but like there's a way in which it's just very peaceful to watch if you're interested in those things and you love these women. Like, but and so in a weird way, I did feel hesitant to review it because I was like, that's a condescending opinion, it's actually like, it's like a. But so I do think that there are shows like that. But the thing is, the guilty pleasure problem I have is with genuinely good shows that people frame as guilty pleasures. And I talk about this in the book, but the whole origin of the book is this colleague I had who I passed in the hall and I said, we were talking and I was like, what are you watching? And she was like, oh, just guilty pleasures like Jane the Virgin. And I was like, what? And I was like, it's beautiful and intelligent. It has these like warm, humane themes, but it's done in this very sophisticated way. It's a great cast. And then she was like, that's a different thing, which is a show that is a genuinely interesting and good show. Sex and the City is another one of those. And some of these are coded female shows like I'm talking about, but I think it goes across a lot of different kinds of things. Shows that are genre shows like sci-fi and fantasy shows, sitcoms in general. Like there's a way in which people get trained to sort of downgrade their own love of a show or even doubt the show's goodness because it seems enjoyable, humane, funny, formulaic. That's a thing that I think that's where I'm like, guilty pleasure doesn't actually match the thing. And that's why I think those are two different kinds of experiences.
The show you love that I think is exactly this?
What?
The Fosters.
Yeah, but I love the Fosters.
I know.
And
I think the Fosters have some good things about it.
I actually
but
thought
as
we were
it
talking
kept
about the
going,
Fosters.
I was just like,
Hey,
okay.
to be fair to me, during the one season where they had too many plot twists and that bomb sound at the end of everything,
it was definitely
like,
had
I know we're talking about something
then.
incredibly specific that people won't know what we're talking about, but The Fosters is this wonderful show
It's pretty good.
that is definitely
was fine,
definitely has a sometimes a sort of like corny, like visually it's actually not a great show, and it's a ensemble family show that is a little bit like soapy. And there was one season where I felt like it had melodramatic plot twists that felt like they were put on it from the network. But I actually disagree with you. I think the show was, it was just an emotionally sophisticated show. Like the characters were really rich to me. I felt like it got into subjects, not just in a like politically pedantic way, but in a like human way that shows that seem theoretically more sophisticated never even vaguely touched on. And it was often genuinely funny. It was inconsistent. Right. That I will grant you. Like the reason it was inconsistent is because they had to make 22 episodes a year. It's like I tend to try to recognize the difference between somebody making like a 6-episode cable show that they get 2 years in between and something that's being made on the CW.
Well, this is right.
This is under different economic. That's not actually a put down of the CW.
Yeah.
That's a recognition that.
The thing that you're talking about is also like, I think it's one of the big themes of the book, and it's sort of one of your arguments about how you think about television, which is like sort of this internal hierarchy, not just even comparing to movies and books, but like within television, that the anti-hero show, like the very handsome drama made by a difficult man is like the esteemed thing, and all these shows that are dealing with soap opera or sort of more gay themes like Ryan Murphy and Shonda Rhimes and the people like are disrespected. Do you feel like that? I feel like that has also has shifted certainly in the critical community about like what
I agree with you, and that's one of those things that when I was working on it, I was like, Is this something everybody agrees on now? That it's not about flipping the hierarchy upside down. It's not like Breaking Bad, bad, Foster's good. Like, it's not that. It's literally to, and anybody who reads my anti-top 10 list piece I write every year, where I'm like, from being at New York Magazine with Willa, like, I was like,
that list is always a miracle. I can't believe, like, every year she refuses to write a top 10 list, and somehow it's always so amazing. Well, even though they're always like, I refuse to write a top 10 list, but here we go.
Although I will say, in 2016, December 2016, I think everybody was feeling a little fatigued and upset, and I think I knuckled. I kind of wrote a list, but the thing is, I do have this. I have this repulsion to what seem to me to be simplistic hierarchies. And this extends to what I'm trying to say about this. Like, I want people to say complicated things about the Fosters. It's not that I want the Fosters to rise to number 3. It's that I want people to be able to take it seriously as art in the way that it communicates with its audience and what it's doing. Like, that's different to me than just saying, like, it's about expanding the conversation. It's not about, like, flipping every Ryan Murphy show, which are very varied, but it is about not writing about Ryan Murphy, who's a divisive figure for good reason. Like, it's not about flipping it and saying, like, this good, that bad. I don't know whether that's responsive to your question.
What do you think is, like, happening in TV? Like,
oh my God, Willa!
No, like, how do you, like, I guess that's, like, my leading way of asking that very large question is, like, I also wonder sometimes, like, because of TV's history, there's a way that we're, like, cheerleaders for this medium, right? Like, we're trying to, it's not just the shows, it's like we want everyone to respect television.
Yes.
But as television has come to occupy this much more central place in the culture, like, most people do respect television. And at what point does that become, like, a little cheerleading?
That is the part of, like the winning the war part, where it's like, you can have more interesting conversations than just saying Buffy's actually a really good show, so that's good. But the main thing that's happened is that TV has changed definitionally and in technology so radically that we're all struggling. Like, it's a whole season comes out at once on streaming. You watch it on your phone. Like, these like comedy and drama have merged so much that they're no longer categories. Even at the Emmys, they don't know what to do. So there are a lot of things that have changed in TV that go beyond just people take TV seriously. But I don't think that, I have to say, part of the reason, and I say this in the book, is I had trouble writing criticism about other mediums because I think I've gotten a lot meaner as I've gotten older, but when I was younger, it felt like a sort of cruel thing to do it, like about art, like you take art you're interested in, you take it apart. But at the time, I was like, I can do this with TV because people look down on TV. So writing a negative review of a TV show is a way of praising TV because it's a way of saying that you have high standards for it. So I think you can be a cheerleader for the medium and still be really discerning and critical about individual shows. And in fact, I think the fact that people take TV more seriously gives people more freedom to actually talk about TV within the history of TV in comparison to other shows. So I don't feel concerned about the cheerleader part of it. Other people can be concerned about that on my behalf. Like, 'cause sometimes people are. They're like, oh. But
you in the book you talk about how, like, you stopped wanting to review books because you felt like, sort of poetry in particular, because you were like, I'm gonna, like.
But poetry, not
poetry.
Books,
right. It was just this, it just felt like you were going to be mean to this, like it just felt it felt like this, it was too powerful, right?
What it is that when I was in graduate school, I got my master's in poetry, and I was reviewing some poetry books for the New York Times, and I ended up feeling like there was something specific about the way that poetry was a highly esteemed art form that very few people read, only one person wrote for very little money, which is actually key in this, because it was like, and so the meaning of even a negative review, like even a mixed review in the Times, felt burdensomely emotionally intense, and you cannot be a critic unless you can also write unless you can be honest about what you think is good and bad and what you think is valuable and not valuable. So I was like, this isn't for me. And then what I always say, somewhat glibly, but I think accurately, is what I realized was that television was the opposite of poetry. But because television is made collaboratively for an enormous mass medium, it was condescended to, and it's made for huge amounts of money. So I felt like there was a level at which TV criticism was an emotional, like, position that I was willing to step into.
Do you feel now that there are actually like some small shows it's like not worth crapping on?
Sure, there are. But the thing is, there is a sort of, and I'm sure you feel this, once you're a critic, you're like, this is the business I have chosen kind of situation where you're like, I do, look, it's a given that when you write a negative review, it's going to hurt somebody. I mean, I think people are dishonest if they don't acknowledge that. It's a great thing about having a book come out because it's like, yeah, like, you know, it's obviously it's an act of vulnerability. I have enormous respect for TV makers, even of bad shows. Like, it's like, you know, it's a weird thing when I have some profiles in the book as well, and when you go on the set of a TV show, you're like, oh my God, people are putting so much energy into making something, even if it doesn't work. It's like really touching, the amount of attention to detail, and the struggle to do it. But the truth is, my obligation isn't to the artist, it's to the medium and the audience. And because TV is also a much puffed art form, I think there's a value in candor and honesty, and it is about taking the art seriously. Like, that is what a negative review is for. It's to be part of a conversation about the meaning of the medium at large and the particular show. But I'm sure you do too. But part of it is because there's no point in writing some sort of like aggressive, voicey takedown of some random CBS sitcom that's not going to last more than 3/4 of a season. Like, when I write negative reviews, which I do, I try to choose things that either I have passionate and complicated feelings about, so I want to express them, or it's a way to say something larger about TV that seems meaningful to me. So that's the category I put those things in, because you do have to pick.
All right, what is your like current TV recommendation?
Loads of Spookies on HBO. I think that show was like a really delightful, pleasurable surprise, partially because straightforwardly, I don't like Euphoria, and I was watching screeners of Euphoria, and I was like, I was feeling really burdened by the show, and so I was in the screener thing already, and I was like, what is this show next to Euphoria? And it was such an amazing surprise. It's half in Spanish, half in English with subtitles for each, and it was created by Fred Armisen with Julio Torres, who's a writer for Saturday Night Live, and Ana Fabrega, who's this very funny comedian, and they perform in it, and it's about this group in, I think, an unnamed Latin American city who form an organization to do like fake horror. They're horror fans. It's very hard to describe, but it's very stylized and funny and weird, and it's just so pleasurable to see something that you're like, what is this? But it just makes you giggle. It's good. And actually, another thing I was just watching that I really like is Sherman Showcase, which is about to come out. It just started. I was just watching it today. It's on IFC, and it's a sort of weird mockumentary about a fake African-American show, a little bit like Soul Train kind of show, but it's like it's like a mockumentary. It's a little like, documentary now, but it's very goofy. It's by these two good guys. I don't know, what have you seen that's good? Because I want to find, we do G-Chat, like the thing is with TV critics, I don't feel like there's a real groupthink. People are too pugnacious and argumentative, but for that, but you don't agree. You think there's too much cheerleading and groupthink. You do, right? Yeah. But I find it very helpful for triage just to say to people what's out that's good, because otherwise I might have missed Pen 15, and that came, and sometimes on Twitter, like I'll ask for recommendations. So I found like Please Like Me, which is an amazing show from Australia that I would have missed. So
you also are watching Veronica Mars right now.
Well, this is a weird thing for a Buffy fan, but I'd watched parts of Veronica Mars, but somehow I'd never watched the first season. Like, I'd never watched the whole show. And there's no logical reason why I was watching this. I'm not writing about it. I wasn't planning on writing about it. You wrote
quite a passionate piece about it. That's why you would watch it.
Well, no, but that's the thing, is that, like, Clive knows this. I kept saying to him, I was like, I know I had like several other important things I should be doing, but all I wanted to do was binge Veronica Mars. I mean, that is a great first season of a show.
Laura Miller, who's a colleague of mine and a friend of yours, she said that back in the day, you were just like, I'm not starting this because it's going to get canceled. Why would you make...
That's so interesting.
Like, I can't start the show. It's just going to get canceled. It's going to break my heart. And that's why you hadn't seen it.
I was so damaged. It's true. Like, my heart had been broken several... I mean, like, I often like shows that get canceled, right? I'm over it now. Like, at this point, I'm like, fine, I'll enjoy 5 episodes of it before the terrible demise. Like, I'll watch a season and a half before they throw it off a cliff.
Do you have like an old show you recommend?
Let me think. It's like
someone like you're like, in all the history of television, a thing that we don't watch enough of.
I mean, this is like such a go-to recommendation that has become a cliche, but there's this Canadian show, Slings and Arrows. Yeah. It's like, it literally, like, after years of being forced to name my favorite television show, I finally was like, fine, I'll give a number one. Like, I really do think it's a spectacularly great show, and I've seen it more than once. It's also a very watchable recommendation, because it's 3 seasons. Yeah. Each season, I don't remember how many episodes it is, but it's like, it's a very doable thing, and it's set at this Canadian Shakespeare Festival based on the real one up in Stratford, and it's this beautiful, unusual mixture of comedy and drama, stylization and emotional realism, and it's, you know, my favorite thing, which is like a backstage drama about creative people, and it has a great middle-aged couple that's super sexy and interesting. It's just a very good show, and it's very philosophical about mortality and art. I just can't praise it more. I do think it holds up also, like, it doesn't feel dated, but there are other old shows that I love. I mean, you know, I'm a Taxi person.
Oh. In the book, like, and you wrote these like little intros to the things, and you, in your essay about sort of like comedy and Trump, which is like, you sort of talked about how, like, I wish I had expanded on like TV news and TV comedy more. It's true. So tell me what.
Well, you mean. It's just this is a piece that I wrote that helped me get writing again. In like February or March of 2017, when I was feeling very like frozen and numb and a little hopeless, and also I was just feeling like, what am I doing? What am I writing? Like, how do I write about the world? And then I wrote this piece that was essentially about Trump as a stand-up comic and the uses of comedy in the election, and I did it through the lens of various different shows. I'm actually pretty proud of that piece. Like, I was both because it kind of like brought me back, so I'm like grateful to it or something. Like, cause it like I felt good writing it, but also it let me use a bunch of things that I've been thinking about shows and then put them all in one essay. But that meant that they had to be short. And there's this one section that's about. Actually, I'm trying to remember it exactly, because it was about, you know, like, part of the thing is that the relationship between cable news as a kind of snarky comedic approach and the idea of comedy shows that parody news shows and the way that they mirror one another and compete with one another, something that goes back in TV history. You know, like, there's always been this thing where comedy shows made fun of the pomposity of news shows and documentaries, back to Monty Python, which did this with the BBC. And, you know, a lot of the great comedy shows are parodies of, you know, even like news radio, things that parody other pompous forms of the medium. But then there's this whole thing that happened with Fox News and The Daily Show. I don't have, like, if I wrote about it, I feel like there's a lot to say about it, because I think that the situation of the authoritative, sarcastic man behind a desk who is sort of a news deliverer and sort of a comedian and sort of a charismatic guy and sort of a person who boils things down, and the relationship between opening monologues that are the way you get the news if you can't stand watching the news, and actual news, which gets delivered in this faux comic way, is problematic. I hate the word problematic. But, you know, I think it's poisonous. I think it's been really harmful.
You just wrote a piece about Chernobyl and the Ava DuVernay show.
Yes.
And I was just like, those I think are actually both good.
By the way, what time is it? I just want to make sure.
We're going to do questions.
Okay.
I'll be done.
I'll
be done babbling in like 2 seconds. There are so many, like,
it was about Unwatchable. It was about the question of
but both of these shows are also like they're like moral, right? Like they have moral work they're trying to do.
That's true.
And I feel like there's a lot of that now, and sometimes those shows are not, those things are not, like, they're not actually good, but they are like trying to do good. I think
you're right.
How do you find, like, navigating writing about those shows?
Yeah, I often get really, twitchy when people talk about morality on TV, because I obviously do care about it, but I agree with you. I think it's insufficient. I don't like pedantic shows. But I do like shows. I mean, I feel a lot of different things about it. I mean, I think those shows are also very good. And I think that the way in which they have moral messages is side by side, like, woven into the aesthetic movements that they make in their relationship with the audience. But but yeah, I mean, I know what you mean. Like bad art that's basically just preachy and is saying like, here are some good ideas is not sufficient. I was happy when I was looking at the book and I realized like, I was like, are there things that I have that are about shows that are questionably moral? And I have this piece about how much I love Hannibal that I found very satisfying to read. But then I thought about it and I was like, actually, Hannibal is a very moral show because it's kind of a stealth vegan show. I think it actually has its own messages. I don't know. I just think it's a straightforward thing. Like people should say if something is clunkily moralistic and artistically bad, but that doesn't mean that moral shows are automatically, pedantic. Like it's okay for art to actually send messages if it does it well. Like I don't have a problem with that. Maybe you have I think you might have more of a.
I don't have a problem with that either.
Yeah.
I think that.
And also the message that Chernobyl send is like A1.
I think it's hard enough to do that people sometimes don't say when something is artistically
honestly
bad.
This is more of an issue to me with Years and Years because Years and Years, which I also just reviewed and I thought was a very good show, but had a certain amount of like gluiness to the dialogue in a way that really surprised me, and I felt like there was such an emergency feeling to the show. Like it was like we need to make a show right now that responds to this thing, and I feel like it's a good and effective show, but I did have questions about like how it delivered its messages. But it goes beyond the panel. I mean, this is like a big issue all over.
Questions.
Yeah.
It's Lee.
Yes, I know her. But okay, so this question is kind of really self-indulgent. So
Okay, I'm just going to tell you something, Lee. We're going to take a bunch of questions, and they can be self-indulgent, but it can't be like
Okay, it's not.
I'm this is warning to everyone. Yeah.
It's an actual question.
Okay.
Okay, I'm a big Trekkie, so did you watch The Next Generation when you were younger?
I did watch The Next Generation.
About that?
I love The Next Generation, but like the only thing I have to say about Trek, although I loved both Treks. I didn't watch all of the Trek stuff. I wasn't like a major Trek person. I do remember really liking. I mean, I liked Picard. Like I just liked, and there were things that I liked in a lot of them. But this is just a personal story. But like years ago, I dated a guy who really made a thing when we first went out on a date by checking whether I liked the initial Star Trek or the New Generation. He like asked in a like a general asking way, but it was like hey, just curious. It was like Diner. Like he was like really checking, and I said that I liked the first Star Trek better, and there was this sigh of relief, and I realized that I was dateable on this basis. But I think a lot of people do this with art, but that's my one Trek story. But yeah, I did like it.
Have you watched Star Trek Discovery?
No, I have not. But we can watch it together. You should come over. Okay.
I really like
I'll get the boys into it.
Because I think a lot of sci-fi shows really fall down on their technobabble, and they make it so obvious to find the holes in their technobabble. And I think Discovery is really good with making technobabble that's so impenetrable that you can't find the flaws in it.
I believe you, and I'm going to put it in I have an app that I write shows that I should watch. I have this Wonderlist app, so I'm going to put it down.
So one of my favorite pieces of TV commentary from you is about the TV you watch with your children. In particular, Jane the Virgin. I love Teen Michael Child, but I would just love to hear about how your experience has been rewatching things with your kids, if you're discovering new things to love and appreciate. And like, I guess it surprised me that your kids are even watching TV instead of just like YouTube or whatever. But seeing what that has been for you.
The reason my children watch TV is that I am their mother. That's the actual truth. And first of all, Team Michael Child's about to come back from camp, and so I'm going to watch the last few episodes of Jane the Virgin with the kids, which is I'm really like so excited about, because it really has been the show that has been the most sort of beautiful and uniting experience for us watching it. And honestly, the conversations about it with them have been so great. But it is true. I mean, I think a lot of kids some kids are into TV, but there are so many other things. And the boys are always turning me on to very weird online stuff, like just strange YouTube things. And I wrote about this briefly somewhere, but because to be straightforward, like I try not to write too much about my kids because it feels like a weird thing to do. But on the other hand, I have to say, in writing about TV, it's been a really interesting and important experience to me. And the shows that I watch with them are mainly shows that I have chosen and that we have watched together. They really haven't suggested something else. And what we've watched is we watched The Office, 30 Rock, Parks and Recreation, The Good Place. Like you see, there's a pattern here. So it's like clearly like, imposing. Before that, we watched Phineas and Ferb, which was like our big show that we loved. And then lately we've been watching Kim's Convenience, which is this really great Canadian show that has a similar, like, and we watched some of Blackish also, and some of Fresh Off the Boat. Like, we basically watched like warm families. Oh, and The Middle. That's the other one that we watch. So that's quite a lot of TV, actually. But the thing is, like, it's sort of a little ritual with us, where we'll like watch one half-hour episode a day or something, and then I'll clearly occasionally tweet during it. But yes, they the thing is, they watch such weird things. Like, how old are your kids? Littler. So they don't, like, because at a certain point, they would sometimes get up in the morning and then they wanted to watch, like, there's this YouTuber, Captain Sparkles, who does like YouTube things where he literally reads Reddit threads that are just funny jokes or pictures on Reddit, and I'm like, this is such a strange kind of media, because it's not like you're going to the Reddit thread together. You're watching this guy in California read the Reddit thread on YouTube. So anyway, I would like to write about more of the, because I feel like there's new aesthetics that take place on YouTube that aren't exactly TV, but are artistically incredibly interesting and worth talking about, but no one has the language to talk about them because they're perceived as sort of jokey, quirky, or alternately harmful. So it's interesting. It's a weird thing about getting older also.
Wait, do you, when you're watching stuff for review, do you like let yourself be on your phone?
I do different things depending on the show I'm watching. I have a big screen and I try to watch especially visually strong things on that and pay close attention. But, we get screeners and I often watch on my computer. And so I don't get on my phone. But what I do is I'm watching a screener and I'll put either a sticky next to it, like a digital sticky, and take notes on the show in the digital sticky, or put a strip of Google Docs and I'll do that. So yes, that's not maybe the ideal way to be watching a show, but that's how a lot of people watch shows. So that's my excuse.
How do you feel studying literature translated to thinking and writing about two things, nervous English?
I'm not sure. I mean, I feel like there are certain things that I read that were very valuable to me in emotionally and intellectually and thinking about art, but I was pretty alienated graduate student. I didn't feel great in the late 90s. There was a big theory focus. I felt like the kind of writing that I did that was much more conversational was not actually the most valuable kind of writing to do in that context. So I don't think it was, it's not as though, I wouldn't want to exaggerate the story and be like, and I watched The Pack from season 1 of Buffy, and I walked into the bursar's office. It wasn't like that. Like, I left and I went into journalism, and it was partially just because I wasn't really well suited in a lot of ways for, I felt like I like to jump from topic to topic. I have a different writing style. So I can't say. I mean, I think that everything I ever did probably contributed. And the one thing I love novels. Like, I love literature and I love poetry. Like, and one weird thing about being a TV critic, and I don't know if this has come up for you, but I've absolutely said no at this point to appearing on panels that are like, is TV the new novel or TV versus movies? Because I feel like it's the wrong question. They may be an economic competition with one another, but they're not, to me, an artistic competition. They do different things. And I wish I had more time to read. That's the truth. But of course, I wish I had more time to watch TV. I just, it's like draining. That's not a good answer, but I don't really have an answer. Oh, okay. Sorry.
What you touched on with the shifting role of directors made me think of the controversy with Big Little Lies recently.
Yeah.
Of the second season.
That was weird, right?
And I was curious to get your thoughts.
Just to fill people in, Big Little Lies, which was directed by, what's that guy's name? That French guy?
Jean-Marc Vallée.
Jean-Marc Vallée. That's really fun to say. It's like Les Spookies, Jean-Marc Vallée. Jean-Marc Vallée did a wonderful job, honestly, directing the first season of Big Little Lies. I do think that was a major part of that show's power. And then the second season, they gave it to, what is her name?
Andrea Arnold.
Yeah, they gave it to Andrea Arnold, and then there was some kind of like sneaky deal that they made where they were like, you get to direct it, but secretly you don't get to direct it at all, and we're making all our own decisions. So, I don't think that I didn't see the whole season, but I did not think that season 2 of Big Little Lies was very good. But I can't chalk it up to whatever happened with this weird direction thing. But I did think it was interesting because the struggle for who gets to control a show is a very fraught thing that varies strongly from show to show, from cable to network. The whole model of TV, which was originally I mean, it was originally a writer's room that was overseen by advertisers, and then there's this rise of the showrunner that was the head writer who also became sort of the CEO of the show and the circus master and the advertiser for it and all of this kind of stuff. And then there's been this, new idea of the director as this central figure in creating TV, which was not true because directors, even, nobody knew the names of the directors on The Sopranos when The Sopranos was a visually really ambitious and good show, but it worked the way that TV has tended to work, which is that they were weekly hires. That's changed. And I do think that Big Little Lies is, I just like the gossip because it's interesting to think about like where the choices came from. But I have to say, Jean-Marc Vallée, I really felt like Big Little Lies, the reason that season worked, I don't know how you felt about it, but it was like, did you like the first season? Yeah, I thought it was literally like the direction and the performances in that final scene where they all look at one another and know. That's a purely visual thing that could not have happened on TV a little while ago. Like to have a scene where people just are gathered and in this violent but also emotional moment, they just make eye contact with one another and realize what the plot means and that they share this trauma and what happened, and it's like a weather event or something. It was really amazing, and if it had been poorly directed, it would not have worked. So like that was one of those things where I was like, I don't have anything to say about like what happened in the second season, but I would like someone to write more investigative pieces about it because it does seem very juicy. Yeah, let's take someone back there. Does anyone behind have a question?
Okay. No?
Oh my God. Oh, there.
I'm just curious about your thoughts about British versus American.
Well, I have a couple thoughts. There's actually, when I started writing about TV, I think I thought of myself as like very snottily like anti-Anglophile. Like I thought I don't like all that tablecloth stuff. Like all the like I wasn't like really into British stuff. And then to my total shock, I loved a lot of British shows. And so I had to reconsider my own internal weird snobbery about it. But also, British TV has several major advantages. One of them actually is that it's illegal in England to have product integration, which is a subject I'm obsessed with. And so the relationship of advertisers to TV is really different. The other thing is that, there are real faces on American TV now, but that was much more true in British TV, and it's like the huge pleasure, I think, of watching British television is just seeing a wider range of the ways that people look. Like I just find that with the actors there, that's just true. And also the model of British TV, and I don't know exactly why because I'm not a huge expert on it, definitely earlier provided the possibility of having a show that was just like 6 episodes or 3 episodes. And there are times that that's been really effective and helpful. So like those are structural things that I think are connected to some of the aesthetic things, but there are bad British TV shows too. So, it's interesting. It's interesting the relationship between the two because there's a lot of American TV shows that end up being adaptations of British shows, and the differences between them are always kind of fascinating to me. And I like both the British The Office and the American The Office, and it just shows the difference between like the whole plan of how the show was made changes what it was doing and what it was good at. But
just along like with that same kind of theme, I was just wondering like what on Netflix there's so many foreign shows and a lot of them that were made before they knew they were going to go global.
Yeah.
They're sort of, and I was wondering how that changes like, in terms of like tropes and expectations of what happens, like how that affects the way.
Oh my God, it's so crazy because obviously Netflix, like we were talking about TV, we haven't even talked about Netflix. Like Netflix, this enormous phenomenon that's totally altered everyone's lives in this very unnerving way. But yeah, the sudden access to global television through a bunch of different means, but Netflix being a major one of them, and also to older television is this huge shock. And I have to say, I always say that, like, I spent years being cranky and being like, young people don't know TV history. Like, this show was based on this other show and they don't know it. And now all of a sudden, like, everyone who's younger is like binging ER and stuff. And like, it's like a weird situation where suddenly there are all of these older options, but also all these global options. I mean, I don't have like a broad thing to say about it, but I'm excited about it. But I also feel a little sad because I want to catch up on stuff, and it's hard to set priorities. I mean, there's this, I wanted to write about, I think it's Japanese, this show Terrace House, the reality show, and I watched a bunch of episodes of it, and I was like, this is really fascinating. It has such a different rhythm. Like, it's it's a reality show like The Real World and stuff, but it has a totally different cultural setting. There's different ideas in it. But I actually felt like I want to write about it, but I can't write about it until I learn more, because my review is going to be so naive and unknowledgeable. So I have to read like the coverage of the show. And also there's like 8 seasons of it and then a bunch of spin-offs. So it's just like with Real Housewives, where I wanted to write about it and I was like, it's too late. I have to write about Vanderpump Rules. Because I have to go in. So, I mean, I'm excited about it, but also overwhelmed, which is sort of the state of TV. Sure.
I want to just ask,
Sure, we have to.
Sorry.
Sorry.
I
that's the last one.
see you.
Okay.
Jumping off the Netflix thing, there are so many platforms we can watch TV on now, and do you think you have intrinsic bias watching something like on CISO or YouTube Originals that it's bad?
Well, I have, CISO was actually kind of good.
I
like,
work
right?
in comedy TV, so
Okay. Because I was actually always regret. CISO was this weird app experiment where they had a lot of weird. I'm just saying, like, I always regretted it. I was going to write about this British show Flowers, and I never got around to it. And then CISO went under, and I was like, well, I can't tell people to watch something that is inaccessible. I once wrote about a British show called Mad Fat Diary, which is a brilliant show, but they haven't been able to show in the States, I think for music rights reasons, but among other things. But it was on YouTube. And so I convinced my editor that it was accessible enough, and then they took it off YouTube. So people are going to have to find their own sneaky ways. There's a level at which when I watch something on FX or HBO, they have a pretty high hit rate, although they've also had some very bad shows. So I feel some kind of trust of the production brand, but I almost think I have the opposite attitude, because there have been so many good shows that have come out in incredibly weird places that have been like my specialty, where there was that one weird year that the first season of Unreal was on Lifetime, and Mr. Robot, which is not my favorite show, but was like an amazingly ambitious and cool show. The first season of that was on USA, and everybody was like, USA, the Blue Sky channel, like that shows only like upbeat and oddly delightful procedurals starring handsome men. Like, what is that? So it was just very odd that they had the show. But I think this is just the nature of a lot of cable TV, is they decide to invest in one weird ambitious show and then they rebrand themselves. But that goes way back. Like, that's how Buffy did it. Like, Buffy and the WB. They were like, we got Buffy, now we're the Buffy channel. So I don't really feel like I am, in fact, biased against small weirdo play. And actually, and specifically some of the female or teen-oriented ones, I resent the attitude people have toward them. So like the CW and whatever. What got changed to Freeform? It was ABC Family. Yeah. Like, I loved a lot of shows on ABC Family, and I was like, Freeform? Sounds like a bra. Like, it's like it's like a terrible name. I thought I had gotten over it, but apparently I haven't. But the thing is, like, I feel like I actually have an almost anti-snobbery where I want to find good shows on those places. So should we stop? We should. Okay. Yeah. Thank you guys so much for coming. Thank you, people in the back.